Lakatos. Imre Lakatos. So it's he's a Hungarian philosopher of science, but from Jewish descent. His real surname is Lipschitz. He was born in Hungary in 1922, so in the same year as Thomas Kuhn, and he's a little bit older than Feyerabend, but they were all three of them of more or less of the same age. So I mean Kuhn, Lakatos and Feyerabend. So Popper was a little bit older, 20 years older than they, and Wittgenstein was still older. So we are moving in the direction of younger generation. Now, you know that the German troops occupied Hungary in 1944 and started persecution of the Jews, of the communists, of course. So Imre Lakatos had to go into hiding, and that's where he got his pseudonym, Lakatos, which in Hungarian means worker. Well, I would say metal work, that a repair worker who just is doing repair works in your house, or just to works in the. So well, after the war, he somehow retained this pseudonym, and so he's known as Lakatos. After the war, he stayed in Germany, in Hungary, and he was specialized in and even visited the Soviet Union. But then he was suspected of some anti-party activity and was arrested and put into prison. Well, this no, maybe to leave Hungary and to move to Austria. So Lakatos used this opportunity. He moved to Austria, and then he moved to England. And there to London School of Economics. He was teaching there as an assistant and pupil sort of Karl Popper. So I mean pupil not in the sense that Karl Popper was teaching him philosophy of science. He already knew it, but he was like his, I would say, disciple, or what you see, continuator of his tradition. Popper was always seeking to have some pupils. You remember we spoke last year about Agassi. Agassi. So, well, he was also still living. Agassi, he is now in Jerusalem. Well, you could say Jewish himself, so he surrounded himself with Jewish um, pupils, like Jewish followers. Not exactly. Popper was a very international thinking man, and he liked very much, for example, Feyerabend, who was even, I would say, a Nazi, because he served in during the Second World War. But it didn't, for Popper, it was not the obstacle. He liked Feyerabend very much and wanted him to also to be enlisted among his followers or pupils. But Feyerabend declined the offer himself. He wanted independence. And you know from the previous lecture how independent he was. So he say, a terrible child, or in French they say enfant terrible, of the whole community of philosophers of science. So his position was very much unique, but not so unique. We know that in his thesis of incommensurability of scientific paradigms or theories, he was the follower of Thomas Kuhn in some way. Well, now we'll speak about Imre Lakatos. So he was a student of Popper, but he tried to combine in certain way the teaching of Karl Popper of falsification and a cumulative approach to the history of science and his critical realism with a theory of Thomas Kuhn, theory of scientific paradigms. So it was a hybrid, and there appeared an original concept of scientific research programs. So this will be the term scientific, by which we recognize Lakatos, scientific research program. So in what sense does it differ from paradigm? Uh, in what sense does it differ from paradigm? Paradigm is too general. According to Thomas Kuhn, paradigm is just a very big metastructure. It sort of comprises the whole educated world. So, for example, heliocentrism, it's the thing that unites not only astronomers, but all thinking beings. The same with Darwinism, the same with the quantum mechanics. Perhaps some people cannot understand quantum mechanics in the mathematical formalism. For example, they cannot solve certain equation, but they still know something about the indeterminacy of quantum events, about Schrödinger or other paradoxes of quantum mechanics, the reduction of the wave packet, and so on. So if they are even biologists or chemists or even humanitarians, they still know something about the philosophy of quantum mechanics. The same with the theory of relativity or with universe, or so-called Big Bang cosmology. So, or particle physics, people know, I think all educated people know the structure of the hydrogen atom, or what are particles or antiparticles or quarks and leptons. So this is just general knowledge, and this is what Kuhn called a paradigm. So paradigm transcends science and becomes a worldview of all educated people. In this sense, Lakatos was against that broadening of this idea. And he said that even in science itself, if you look closer at how scientists work, you can see different approaches, different schools. And every school practices or implements its own scientific research program. Well, for example, psychology. Let's take psychology because it is a very vivid and picturesque example. There is traditional psychology or psychiatry, the so-called German psychiatry, where people in psychiatric hospitals are diagnosed with schizophrenia or epilepsy or, say, bipolar disturbance, and they are treated with drugs, usually. So nobody speaks with them. They are taken to the hospital, and the doctors, after carefully looking at them, maybe asking them several questions, they say he has schizophrenia, he suffers from bipolar disease or bipolar um, disorder, or this one is suffers from epileptic seizures, and will just prescribe him this or say injections or tablets, and 3 times a day. You understand, perhaps you have experience how it is really implemented. This is so-called traditional psychiatry, and it is the mainstream here in Russia, or formerly in the Soviet Union. So my mother is a psychiatrist, so I know it very well. She's still the adherent, or say follower, of this traditional German school, which was founded by Kraepelin, by say Kretschmer and other famous German psychiatrists. But there is also another scientific research program which is formed quite on another basis. This is Freudian psychoanalysis. And they also pretend to cure people, or to sort of treat psychiatric patients. For example, Pauli, as famous physicist, he was not given a traditional German approach or treatment with drugs. He held he addressed himself to the famous Swiss psychologist and psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung. And Carl Gustav Jung practiced psychoanalysis with Pauli and helped him. So Pauli continued to work productively in physics, and even in I think in 1959, he gave a conference where Niels Bohr said to him, "Your theory is crazy. Now the question is whether it is crazy enough," or they say whether it is crazy enough to be true. So this is a joke, you see. Your theory is crazy, but is it crazy enough to be true? So you remember Feuerbach, who also said that all scientific theories are crazy in certain sense. So this is should remind you, this joke of Niels Bohr should remind you of Feuerbach. But now just take this as a fact that after suffering depression and perhaps mania, we don't know diagnosis, he was able to continue his scientific work, and his well, he was not ruined, and but he was given drugs. He was only cured by psychoanalysis. Well, it was of Jung, and there was another school, the school of Sigmund Freud, which was also a different approach in psychoanalysis. Gestalt psychotherapy. Some of you practiced it or know about the so-called Adler school in psychoanalysis, and there also is anti-psychiatry, the school of Guattari and Lacan, the famous French postmodernist psychiatrists who have quite another approach. Of schools, and very prestigious, and the names are quite bright. They do not consider there is no paradigm in psychology. So you cannot say that all psychologists are, or all psychiatrists are united and just form one front, okay, against the. If you ask what is the prominent psychiatric concept of man, well, among, say, educated, well, tastes different. Don't have a unique paradigm like in cosmology. You don't have this Big Bang theory or heliocentric model of the solar system. So here are no such truths. Even prominent neurophysiologists like John Eccles, for example, um, Eccles received Nobel Prize in for his research. There's the close approach. That mind explained by brain science alone. That there is still some of a mystery in how mind operates, and from this follows two approaches in so-called artificial intelligence or AI approach. So some think that artificial intelligence is near at hand, and it depends only on the complexity of computers. So when we'll have, say, quantum computer or sophisticated less at one time, we would not be blessed like to differentiate computer from man. So computer will behave as man. There are experiments like the Chinese room or others. Well, so this is one school, but another school, the school of John Eccles or his teacher Sherrington or Wilder Penfield and other names quite prominent. But they are not sort of erratic personalities or exotic personalities like Feyerabend. They are quite recognized people in their field, neurophysiologists. But they say no, we don't believe in in artificial intelligence because there is something in the which by some computer. So spiritual or extra brain substance or modeled by computer, and this entity sort of the center of thinking and free will and morality and consciousness and conscience, and it forms the human I. So among neurophysiology community, biologists, for example, here is a famous biologist Dorbzhansky. Uh, Dorbzhansky. He is of Russian descent, but he emigrated first then to the United States. He didn't want to, so he was like called non-returner. And Dobzhansky was a believer, a Christian, and at the same time evolutionists. So there are two types of evolution. One is a concept of evolution. Monod, who is a French geneticist and biologist, who speaks about materialistic evolution, chance and necessity, so that the motive part, or say the part of evolution, is chance. So there is no no design, say, in nature. But others, very prominent, say, biologists like Dobzhansky, say that they believe in God like a creator, and it doesn't contradict their views on evolution. The second such biologist is French Jesuit Teilhard de Chardin. Well, he was popular in Russian in the Soviet Union because of aggressiveness, and he wrote the book which is called The Phenomenon of Man in 1960s. But now I think he's a little bit forgotten. So maybe you don't know who he is, Maybe only Angel Sierra knows about Teilhard de Chardin. Well, oh, so just Google him and you will see he's a paleontologist, and he discovered Homo uh, um, uh, Sinaiticus, or um, mm, well, I mean that in biology there are also some dissent. Not all biologists are, well, maybe they are that they are evolutionists, but as for the momentum or driving force of evolution, they can differ. Well, so here are we can say scientific which all have their so-called, according to letters, they have their uh, uh, hardcore. What is that? Hardcore. Hardcore is a main principle which is without which the scientific program loses its identity. So it's like maybe it's by the DNA, the discovery of the DNA. So DNA is like your genome, okay? So in every scientific research program, there is a makes it um, an entity or an individual. So you can recognize it by particular features which belong to it alone. So if you will say that, for example, Jacques Monod, if we'll say, well, Jacques, can you please agree with the idea of design, the idea of purpose, the idea of providence? Jacques Monod says no. Uh, no, I don't recognize these facts. I think that chance, there's no always the product of chance. So here's his hardcore of his program, that there's chance and necessity. Well, if you ask Richard Dawkins, for example, maybe there is no such concept as selfish gene. This is my hypothesis, the selfish gene, um, selfish, um, selfish gene. This is the idea of Richard Dawkins. The gene wants to sort of procreate, to somehow conserve itself. So explains the whole biological process. Well, like Darwinist theory, that every species wants to procreate, to prolong life, and suffer for survival. So now it all is transferred to the world of genomes or genes or molecules. So every molecule like DNA survive, use other molecules, and even viruses. Well, viruses cannot survive without a living cell. So what do? They try to enter the living cell, enter its hereditary mechanism, its also core, its nucleus, and ask the cell to replicate viruses because they cannot replicate themselves. So they need a cell in order to continue to survive. So you can say about the selfish genes, selfish viruses. This is all typically the concept of Richard Dawkins. And if this is the hardcore of his scientific research program. So if you change something there, he will object and we say, no, you shouldn't change here something. Well, but you can say, well, your theory contradicts this or that fact. If there's some contradiction, I will sort of try to defend my hardcore by so-called protective belt. Also, I think this, this idea of Lakatos, the idea of hardcore and protective belt, is taken from biology, because the membrane of the cell defends cell from virus, other influences which can be noxious for the cell. So the membrane, or like the border, it is acts as a kind of protection also. So like, well, and so every theory has this of hypothesis safe being falsified. So you understand that for Popper, falsification is the death of theory. So if the theory is proved wrong, it dies. So, well, in order not to die, so every scientific research program has this protective belt of some hypotheses, which are formed, as Lakatos said, ad hoc. This Latin expression can be translated into English as for this purpose, or for this, for this purpose. So, for example, and now, what is the difference between Popperian approach and Lakatos approach? So, for example, psychoanalysis has very rich and powerful protective belt. So it's very difficult psychoanalysis. For example, part of the hardcore of, say, Freudian psychoanalysis is Oedipus complex, so that there is some sexual connection between the child and his mother, if he's a male child, and or vice versa, between a girl and her father. And so this connection is sexual, but somehow not all can recognize it. These sexual drives are driven into subconsciousness. So belt, the theory. So this lack of recognition in some this sexual character of their relations with their parents is can be regarded as a falsification of the theory. But Popper says, no, it is not the falsification, so my theory is not dead, because you cannot disprove my theory, because I can explain this lack of evidence by that censorship which is exacted by this is maybe explanation, you see. So, well, for Popper, such, say, tricks, such deep, how to say, defense of a theory which does not, even in principle, has the procedure of being falsified. So you never, you cannot imagine an experiment in which Freudian theory will be falsified. So for Popper, it is just the proof that Freudian psychoanalysis is not science, because it cannot be falsified. But with Lakatos, it's not the same, because for Lakatos, the real value of every concept, scientific concept research program is so-called positive heuristics. Heuristics. It can find new facts or explain facts. For example, uh, uh, Freud explained what was not explained by, say, Soviet Marxists. Begin my so Marxists not explain the deviation of sexuality in some people. For example, sexual maniacs, which existed in the Soviet Union as they exist in every other country. So for Marxists, this was a mystery, how in socialism, when exploitation of man by man is done with, and we are building a just society, how can these maniacs appear? How this sexual aggression is possible? Well, of course, for Marxists, it is a mystery, because Marx was a poor psychologist and he couldn't understand mechanisms of the human psyche. But for Freud, you understand, it's quite evident, because Freud understands the genesis of sadism. You know, sadism, it's a deviation. I'm sorry, I will write it. Sadism. It's not used in Latin America, Angel Sierra, or you know this word.
Yes, yes, it's very similar
Okay,
in
okay.
Spanish.
This is called after Marquis de Sade, who wrote some erotic in the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century. So for Freud, it was obvious that every child passes in his development this stage of sadism, but he overcomes it usually very quickly, and so it doesn't in his mentality. But if their development is abnormal, for example, if the parents are themselves cruel to their child, or maybe if the child undergoes by his peers in kindergarten or in school or in the army, these traces of sadism can grow and become predominant. And after this experience of being bullied, a personality can develop a defense which can be also sadistic in its core. So this sadism somehow. So Freud is very well in explaining maniacs, sexual maniacs, which we all know. The examples perhaps even in Latin America, but I think it's more prominent in the United States. But still, I think every civilization has it. Maybe in India, this is not a great problem, but who knows? Also, we can explain also criminal, this, which for Marxists, it was quite a mystery why there are so many criminals in the Soviet Union, why people continue to beat their wives, to steal property, to kill each other, to fight with each other. What is the source of all this aggression? For Freud, it was no mystery. Freud was very able in describing and predicting all these things. So we can say that Freudian concept, according to Lakatos, has positive heuristics. So explain and even predict some things. Well, this is not a deficiency of a theory, but it's like a strong point. Uh, so, uh, so Lakatos didn't consider Freudianism or Freudian psychoanalysis to be a pseudoscience. He considered this to be a scientific research program, which has a hard core. This means Oedipus complex, this division of man personality in subconsciousness, ego, and super ego, and other, well, perhaps also important concepts, which form the nucleus or the hardcore of psychoanalysis. Well, of course, these concepts are completely lacking in Marxism. I received a Marxist education in school. We were not taught sexual behavior, like they call it ethics, or they call it in school this subject. Maybe you have it, Angel, in your school. Did you have it like sexual education or something like that? Who had it in school? Maybe nobody.
Yes, it was
You
part
had.
of a subject in civ ethics and civism.
Ah, I see.
Yes.
Well, we had only anatomy, and in the lectures there was maybe one lesson devoted to sexual organs. Usually, the teacher didn't say us anything, only ask us to read it ourselves in a textbook. So this was completely sort of shunned, or sort of ousted, or I would say banished from our program in uh, in Soviet Union. But we had classes, and a lot of classes on Marxism. So we knew Marxist paradigm or Marxist research program very well. You see, so this means that there are different concepts of man. So Marxist concept of man is one thing, and Freudian concept of man is another thing. And Marxists, of course, Marxist approach could explain many things in man, but not all. For example, sadism, this um, with encountering this sort of feature or this problem, Marxism was quite, um, how to say, forceless or impotent. It couldn't solve this puzzle. You see?
I'm sorry for interrupt, but this
Yeah.
link, the